What should you do versus what actually works? So today I want to talk about a topic that seems to come up quite a lot in all of our tennis journeys and arguably in life as well. Whether in tennis it's to do with the strings we use, the rackets, the technique that we learn, is that sometimes the thing that we are told we should do isn't always the same as the thing that actually works for us. And as a bit of a spoiler, as we go through this, we're going to find out that those two things aren't necessarily the same. To start with, I'm going to talk about stringing. So number one thing, obviously, I do a lot of stringing, I try a lot of strings out, and I will test a lot of stuff. And it's not just to me, but I read online, or even when I talk to people, that it seems like there's this written book of rules in stringing that thou shalt not break. Whether one of the classic things, you should never string that string above that certain tension. You should always cross with this type of string. You should never put those two strings together. Or you should always cut strings out after a certain amount of time. It can seem endless. And firstly, I'll say there is a lot of common sense to those, which I wouldn't say are rules. They are guidelines. They can be absolute, genuinely helpful if you are starting out or you are looking at a starting point with a particular string or type of string. They can absolutely point you in the right direction. But the problem comes when people start taking those guidelines and they start thinking that they are absolutely written in stone. I've heard or read too many statements that start with, you should never do that, or you should never try that. And honestly, each time I see or hear or read one of those statements, I kind of think to myself, says who? Because the truth is, they're not rules. They aren't even necessarily the law of physics. They are just starting points. Useful suggestion, actually nothing more. At the end of the day, the only real rule in tennis and potentially in life is try it. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, try something else. But then I could also argue and say, if it works for you, don't assume that it works for someone else, and vice versa. If you are going to go through that rule of trying it and see if it works, don't be afraid if the thing you're trying sits outside of these so-called rules. That's obviously talking about strings, but this also applies to another massive area where you see a lot of statements like this, which is where you come to technique. So take, for example, my serve. At the moment, I've saw a video that suggests that instead of starting with your head down, looking at the ball and following the ball up, to actually have your head sort of level, and then as you toss, as it gets to your shoulder and eye height, then go up with the ball. Now, that creates a lot of stability for me, whereas having your head down arguably creates this jerking motion, which creates too much movement, too much going on. Now, that actually works for me really, really well. What I'm not going to do is start saying that's an absolute rule that everybody must follow. An example of that is Kenin. She actually has that motion where she does look forward, but she tosses and then she looks up. Almost a bit of a jerking motion where you could say, actually, isn't that wrong? Shouldn't she go sort of more smoothly? As the ball goes up, follow it up nice and smoothly. But then we look at Kenin, and from what I can tell, she has a pretty reliable serve. And arguably, is she looking forward, looking at her opponent and seeing where they're going, and then she's able to place it at the last minute, a little bit like Federer. It gives an example that actually, while there are some common traits, she's potentially doing something that other people might say, that's really unorthodox, you shouldn't do that. But for her, clearly it works. And she probably learned that over years and years and got something that works for her, and she's got a very reliable serve. You probably wouldn't train it to somebody from day one, but if you develop it and it works, it works. Another great example, probably the most famous one, Rafa's forehand with that buggy whip. As far as I understand, he developed that when he came onto tour when he was really young, was having the ball hammered at him. He was hitting kind of late, and so instead of coming through because he couldn't, he had to hit and come up over his head. Now, again, would you teach that to someone on day one? Probably not. Would you teach them to deal with a late ball? Absolutely. I think a lot of us, if you hit late, you naturally do go up and over. It's a very natural action. The point there is, it's not wrong. Maybe it's not the best thing that you would teach to everybody, but you can't turn around and say, don't do that, because for someone else, actually a kid picks it up, follows Rafa, gets passion, they decide to do that buggy whip, it works for them, and you know what? If it works, it works. And who are we to say otherwise? So for both of those, unorthodox, yes. Wrong? Absolutely not. I think the real test there, however, is simple. Does it work under pressure? Does it work under stress? Does it work without causing you injury or stress on your body in the case of technique? And if the answer to those things is yes, it does work, then it works. However, I will say there is something to be said for don't just follow trends blindly, but also don't be different just for the sake of it. What this isn't saying is that those things which we can take as guidelines, or even some people would call best practices, they are there for a reason. You should be considerate of them. I have seen some other YouTube channels, there's one in particular where the person seems to purposefully try and break every single rule or guideline and be completely different. I kind of think they're probably doing it for clickbait and to try and get views, so probably very smart if that's working. But practically you look and go, you're kind of taking it to the extreme, and I'm not sure that would pass those tests, particularly holding up under pressure. That said, however, if your purpose is to go out there and explore and be different and enjoy yourself and you don't really care, then again, if that's your goal, then potentially that does work. But I think what this absolutely is not saying is don't follow those guidelines, don't consider them. It's just don't feel like you're being chained by them. To that end, I will say that arguably, and I'm going to break everything I've just said here, there probably is only one real rule, although even that, frankly, is a guideline and an opinion. And that is, there are no definitive rules. There are the laws of tennis, but otherwise everything else, it's simply a case of logic, experience, and personal preference. We are all different. We have different styles. We have different physiques. We have different mentalities, and we have different needs. You will not find an absolute answer on YouTube. If you try, it will drive you crazy, because let's face it, everyone's opinion contradicts everyone else's, including mine. There is only one real way forward. Never be scared to try something. Strings are cheap, experiments are cheap. If a setup doesn't work, cut it out and try something else. But equally, and this is really important, never be afraid to trust what already works for you. If somebody tells you you shouldn't do that, but you're playing well, you're consistent, you're comfortable, you're not getting hurt, then it works. End of story. So that's it. Guidelines are helpful, but they are not commandments. And anybody who tries to tell you so, maybe you need to think twice as to whether you really listen to them as if they're preaching gospel. Because again, the only real rule in tennis, and arguably in life, is if it works, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I'm sure this video is going to, in itself, bring out lots of views and opinions. I welcome them all. Keep it clean, keep it respectful to me, but also if you're talking amongst each other, put your thoughts in the comments. It's always good to see these different views and opinions exactly for what they are, views and opinions.